So in this video, I want to go over the pros and cons of bulking, right? We're going to go over 3 pros and 3 cons of bulking because obviously there's positive and negatives to both bulking and cutting, right? So we'll start off with the pros. And the first one being the most obvious, the one you probably would have expected, is that you're gonna build muscle, you're gonna get bigger, you're gonna feel stronger, you're gonna have better pumps, you're gonna feel better overall because of the fact that you're feeding your body an excess amount of calories. So it has a lot more fuel to obviously fuel your workouts, but also additional resources to build new tissue. Right, so that's obviously the biggest goal of a bulk, is to get bigger, stronger, and to build new muscle. And like I mentioned in a previous video, your rate of muscle growth is very much so genetically predispositioned. And what I mean by that is some people are just able to pack on a lot more muscle a lot faster than some people are, just because of how their genetics are kind of played out, right? So you have really no control over that. But also just know that the process of building muscle is significantly slower than dropping body fat, right? You can easily drop 20 pounds of fat in 3 months, but it's almost impossible to do so, at least naturally, to build 20 pounds of muscle in that same time frame. So that's obviously the biggest difference, is one of the biggest differences at least, is how long it takes to achieve the same weight change, going from building muscle to losing fat. The next major pro of being in a bulking phase is, at least in my opinion, is you're able to, the pumps you get in the gym are way better than when you are calorie deprived trying to lose body fat, right? You just feel a lot fuller. You feel a lot better, you have more energy, obviously you have more calories to fuel that energy, but your pumps are much better in a bulking phase versus a cutting phase. One of the biggest reasons for that is obviously you have more calories, but specifically you have more carbohydrates, you have more glycogen that your body's able to use, and typically in a higher diet, you're gonna have more salt as well, right? Just from the sheer volume of food you're consuming, proportionally you're gonna be consuming more salt as well. So pump is basically a combination of being hydrated, right? Water, drinking enough water, eating enough carbohydrates, and salt. So a combination of those 3 will get you kind of an awesome pump in the gym. And again, you have kind of more of all 3 of those when you are in a bulking phase than you are in a cutting phase. Trust me, when you're trying to cut, your body's deprived of energy, and it's much harder to get that same level of carbs, water, and salt into your lean tissue as it is when you obviously have excess calories from a bulking phase. And the third pro of being in a bulking phase is more of a vanity reason, but you're gonna feel and look a lot bigger in clothes. So it's kind of a trade-off. Obviously, you're putting on a little bit of excess fat to build that new tissue, but you're gonna feel and look bigger and fuller in clothes. So it's kind of a trade-off because you're wearing clothes, you look bigger in a bulk, but obviously on the beach, you want to be shredded, you want to be lean. So that's why I typically recommend doing bulks in the winter, typically from like October, November, all the way through like April, and then do a summer cut there. So that is obviously a big pro, at least, especially in the winter. When you're going out, you want to feel big, you want to look big in your clothes, you want to fill out your clothes, which is obviously all much easier done when you are bulking versus cutting. Now, one of the biggest cons of being in a bulk is obviously you're gonna have to put on a little bit more fat than you otherwise would, right? Like I mentioned, you have to be in a calorie surplus if you want to get bigger, if you want to gain muscle and gain size, right? No matter how hard you're training in the gym, if you're not eating enough, if you're not fueling your body with enough resources to actually build new tissue, you're not gonna get bigger. Right, so in terms of how much of a calorie surplus you should be in, I mentioned this in a previous video, but I would start off with all you need is 200 calories surplus, right? I like the approach of a lean bulk versus a dirty bulk, and the difference obviously is a dirty bulk is eating whatever you want and letting your calorie surplus be as big as you want. But with a lean bulk, it's more controlled. You're minimizing the fat gain, right? You want most of the weight gain to be pure muscle, pure contractile tissue versus excessive fat that you don't need to put on in order to gain that same amount of muscle, right? So I suggest, honestly, 200 calories to start off with, and then once you kind of plateau, 300 calories, again, plateau, 400 calories, again, I would go up to like 600-700 at the most, and then once you kind of at that upper threshold, I wouldn't push that too much further. Rather, I would focus on some sort of progressive overloading, right? So whether that be adding more weights to your compound movements in the gym, decreasing your rest time, increasing your frequency, how often you're hitting that muscle, increasing your volume, so reps and sets of those exercises, especially for compounds. If you are going to be doing progressive overloading, I would focus on the compounds versus the isolations, right? It's much easier to track this stuff on big movements than it would be for like a bicep curl, right? Because with the isolation stuff, a lot of gyms have different kind of like, for example, like cables or machines, they're kind of set up a little bit differently, so you can't kind of it's not very equal across gyms or exercises or machines and cables, stuff like that. If you're doing free weights, by all means, obviously you can track that, but I would suggest focusing on progressively overloading on compounds, specifically like bench press, pull-ups, rows, squats, obviously, leg press, stuff like that. You can easily apply progressive overloading. So yeah, that kind of rounds that off. Obviously you will gain a little bit of fat. That's just part of the process. Just know that, especially if you're natural, you have to be in a calorie surplus in order to build new tissue, to build new muscle. Otherwise, you will not get bigger and you will not gain muscle. One more thing I want to quickly add on to that is, yes, you will gain a little bit of fat. Again, that's just part of the process. But you should never be above a point where you cannot see your abs like at all. Even like the smallest definition, I would suggest keeping at least in that level of body fat. Once you go like above and beyond 20% for men and like 30% for women, then it becomes a lot more difficult to when you start cutting. It takes a lot longer and it's a lot more difficult to get back into your kind of your goal physique. Again, because you have so much excess fat to lose. So I would suggest after a couple months of bulking, or however long really it takes you, once you get to a point where you've added on quite a bit of mass, you've added on quite a bit of size, but you're getting to a point where you cannot see like your definition of your abs at all anymore, then I would pull back and do a mini cut. All you need is like 2-3 weeks to do this, and that will really help you tighten up, lower that body fat a little bit, and kind of get you back into that range that you want to be. Again, you don't need nothing crazy. 2-3 weeks in the span of like 6 to 8 months isn't too big of a deal. And I would again do that probably every few months, or once you get to a point where again you put on too much excess fat and you cannot see any definition, especially in your stomach. The next major con of bulking is definitely, I've gone through this several times, is when you are working out, you just don't look as sick or as good as you would when you're shredded, when you're lean, right? You obviously lose a lot more definition, you're not as sharp, and when you see yourself in the mirror, it might not be as motivating because again, you're kind of under construction almost, but again, you're not gonna be as vascular, you're not gonna be as sharp, you're not gonna be as defined as you would be when you're lean, when you're cutting. You'll feel better, you'll feel stronger, you're gaining muscle, you're getting bigger, but the motivation might be a little bit down just because you just don't look as good as when you are lean or shredded, right? Or if you're someone that thrives off being bigger, you're wearing t-shirts or even sweaters, by all means, I would recommend that when you're bulking. But again, if you're someone that like likes the shredded / leaner look, it can be a little bit more demotivating. Just because you are spending a little bit of time in a bulking phase, obviously, where you're getting a little bit more fluffy than you otherwise would. So I would say I've definitely noticed that psychologically in my workouts when I'm doing bulking phases, and I just see myself in the mirror working out, I just don't look as good, and sometimes it can be a little bit unmotivating just because I don't look as good as what I used to, right? All right, the third and final con of bulking is the way you feel outside of the gym, right? So because a lot of the time when you are bulking, you're eating a lot more calories, obviously, you feel more lethargic, you feel more tired throughout the day, obviously because digestion requires a lot of energy, right? And so when you're eating a lot more food, your body has to spend a lot more energy to break that food down. So with me personally, for example, when I'm not bulking, I love to do intermittent fasting, right? Mostly for work reasons, because I'm a lot sharper, I'm a lot more focused cognitively, and I'm able to focus and get a lot more work done than if I have a big breakfast and I feel like lethargic and have this big spike in blood sugar levels. So most of the year, I like through intermittent fasting. I definitely notice when I'm doing a bulking phase, because I have to now eat a lot more calories. I obviously eat my breakfast, and I'm not as sharp mentally. I can't get as much work done. I feel like I'm not as efficient. So that is definitely one of the downsides of bulking is if you're someone that thrives off kind of fasting or not being stuffed like myself, that can definitely kind of affect you mostly mentally is what I've found. So that is definitely one of the biggest things, obviously, because again, your body takes a lot of energy to digest the food, and if you're spending 8-12 hours of the day eating, obviously can kind of take away from other tasks. So that's definitely one thing I've noticed. Again, to kind of counteract this, I would highly suggest into eating more calorically dense foods, right? So foods that are higher in calories, lower in volume. This will help so much with just kind of not feeling as lethargic, increase your fats, have more nuts, avocados, coconut oils, bars, stuff like that, versus having to like stuff down like pasta and rice, which is a little bit higher in volume for the same amount of calories, right? So that's kind of my biggest tip there. I hope you enjoy this video. 3 cons and 3 pros of bulking, and that's kind of a good overview of what to expect when you enter a bulking phase.